Well, I just want to say hi and welcome everyone. Love to know where you're watching from, so feel free to join in the chat, whether you're on Facebook or here in Zoom. And the International Clarinet Association has so many great events, and what Debbie and I are involved in is a new committee that they're calling the Enthusiast Committee, and it's really aimed at people who love playing clarinet. Maybe it's not their profession, maybe they play at a really high level, or maybe you're just getting it out of the closet after years of being put away. But we want to create events to help you be part of this community because it's a wonderful community. So our intention today is to just give you some pointers. Have your clarinets out. This is aimed at intermediate level players, although if you're just new to it, you're going to learn some things as well. And we're going to talk about tone, articulation, and high notes. Debbie, anything you want to add before we dive in?
Oh, just hello and thank you to Jessica and Jenny for making all this possible for us because this is a huge, exciting endeavor that I'm thrilled to be a part of, and I'm sure Michelle is too.
And we're going to also be taking some questions at the end of our session if we pace ourselves well. So feel free to put your questions in the chat box, and Jenny and Jessica will help make sure they get to our attention. All right. Well, Debbie and I are going to sort of tag team back and forth. We both have lots of great ideas for you. And I want to start just by talking about some simple pointers that you can experiment with to help make your clarinet tone better, more focused, and to have it feel easier to play. I mean, we all want to sound good, and I think me included, we have our clarinet heroes whose tone we love, and we want to do what we can to get that way. So for me, I think the three things related to tone are what we do with our mouth, right? Our embouchure, our voicing, how we use our air, and then the gear that we use. And I'm not going to talk a lot about gear, but I just want to mention I've got a bunch of YouTube videos related to choosing gear and factors, and they're all compiled in one collection. If you just go to www.clarinetgearguide.com, and then you just no charge, you get all of them together. That might answer some of your gear questions. So I want to focus more on things that I think you can do with embouchure and air, and without covering the very basics, because I know Paula Corley just did a great workshop on that. I'll show you some of my tools that I use to help make these things better. And one of the first things that I want to show you is just a fingering that you can use. I call it the embouchure tester. It's a good way to diagnose if there are two common problems that you have when you play. And so I'm going to show it to you. It's a very weird fingering. It's thumb register key, first two fingers on the left hand, first two fingers on the right hand. So we're leaving the third finger up. This is actually an alternate fingering for the high G sharp that sits right on top of the staff, but it's very volatile. So I just want you to try it, and this is what we're hoping happens. But what often happens is one of two things, and that if something else happens, this gives you valuable information. This will squeak very easily. So if you got a squeak like that, it's an indication that you have a little bit too much what I call biting. Your jaw is clamping down on the reed too much. And that's a really common problem on clarinet. In some ways, it's a problem that helps us feel more control in certain registers, but it's at the sacrifice of the full use of tone and resonance. So we want to get rid of that. And we could just think of opening our jaw more, but sometimes thinking of our corners wrapping in, our whole face coming in like that painting of the Scream. Whoa. To me, he's got a good clarinet embouchure. Maybe something funny with his bottom lip, but other than that, he'd be a great clarinetist. We want that support. So typically, if you were squeaking and you round in, you may encounter common problem number 2, which is this sound. You try and blow it and you get that horrible low growly undertone, and this fingering does that very easily. That's an indication that our air is not moving fast enough to vibrate the reed. And there's so much we could talk about blowing and air support, but if we can imagine our air is coming out of us like a garden hose, the muscles that we use to propel the air, we want them to be a spray valve to focus it to the fastest, smallest airstream. When I speed up the air, I'll get that tone. It just takes fast air. Now, often we go from growling to tone to squeaking, because as we think about blowing in more air, we instinctively bite down. So if you find this challenging, I want to encourage you to work on it for the next 2 weeks or so. What I find is when I get this fingering working well, if I can notice how that feels, what am I doing with my face? What am I doing with my air? Then I play anything else, sort of freezing that stuff in position. Everything else is easy. I can keep that same embouchure and play low to high notes, and it's just going to work. So that's kind of my first pointer. Debbie, why don't we jump to you on some tone stuff? Do you mind if we just go back and forth? I have a couple other small things, but I want to make sure we go to yours too.
Yeah, absolutely. So one of the things that I use as a tool to figuring out fast air is if you can whistle. So I whistle kind of funny. I whistle out of the side of my mouth, so it's not the most helpful. But for people that can whistle from the center, if you can whistle, it pulls all your lips towards the center, and it kind of creates this whole round embouchure. Now, obviously, that's not exactly perfect for embouchure because we need our bottom lip to be over our teeth. And of course, there's double lip embouchure, and I'm not even going to get into that. But another way that helps to kind of both get tongue position in the right spot and the air fast enough is to kind of pretend to whistle. And what I notice is that the sides of my tongue kind of go right up against my top molars. So another way to find it is to go, I kind of say he, and then as I'm still saying he, my lips come in and make an ooh shape. So you guys can all try that. And we'll just do an open G. And so I'm going to just take you through the steps that I use. Bottom lip over my teeth, top teeth on the mouthpiece. And I don't like my mouthpiece coming in like this. I like it coming kind of pointing towards the roof of my mouth. And then this is where I'm going to say, I say he to get the airspeed, and then my lips come around the mouthpiece like ooh. Now, a couple other things Michelle said. I love her embouchure tester fingering because that is just like, it will either squeak, growl, or be perfect. And I think that G is a nice note to do that. And if I put too much mouthpiece in when I'm doing this exercise, I'm going to get a beautiful squeak. And if I put too little in, I'm going to not get any sound at all. So finding that sweet spot on your reed, which for me, when you start, I think is just, sometimes you can find it with a piece of paper. If you put a piece of paper between your reed and your mouthpiece, where it stops, that fulcrum is a really nice marker for where to put your bottom teeth to kind of find that place. Below it, it's going to squeak, and above it, it's going to be too tight. So one other tiny thing that I find really helpful is if you can't whistle, but you want to feel what that fast airstream is that Michelle was talking about, take your fingers and your thumb and just make the teeny tiniest little square or diamond, however you want to call it. And you're going to try to blow through that space. That kind of focuses the air to the speed that we want to get our most optimal clarinet tone. And I'm going to pass it back to you, Michelle.
Excellent. I want to show you an exercise that I've been experimenting a lot with my students lately, and this works with all levels of students, and even my university level students find this one really helpful. It's not an easy exercise to do, and in fact, you don't sound good when you're doing it either. So that makes it really, really interesting because it's hard and we don't sound good, but there's great benefits from it. So what we're going to do is an exercise that helps us, again, to get the feel of the round embouchure and fast air. And what we're going to do is we are going to play with double lip for this exercise, and Debbie alluded to that a moment ago. Double lip is where not only is our bottom lip over our teeth, but our top lip comes over our top teeth. And many people use that as their normal embouchure. Many people don't. So if you haven't done it, this will be a new thing for you. One thing about double lip, maybe because I don't do it all the time, I find if I bite too much at all, it really hurts my top lip. So it's kind of like there's great incentive not to bite with excess jaw pressure because it hurts, and it just is a tactile reminder. We're going to go double lip, and the way I describe this is we're going to put ridiculous amounts of mouthpiece in our mouth, way more than we would ever play with. And what we want to aspire to, and this takes practice, is to go almost to where the mouthpiece bends here. So we would never play clarinet this way in a performance setting, but it forces our mouth to be very open. And that really helps us to engage muscles that perhaps we're not used to engaging in that way. And we have to teach our brain and body how to do this. So the exercise, and you will probably squeak when you do this. So if you're squeaking, you have to open your mouth more and then blow faster air. And go for as much as you can. If you really just can't get it to work, put a bit less in your mouth. So you might just start with a little bit more than your normal amount. But I go double lip, and then it really doesn't matter what I play. I just try and play it with sound. So here's maybe my normal amount of mouthpiece. I'm going to go a bit further. Now that feels pretty unstable. It sounds kind of wobbly. Now I'm going to go further. And I'm going to see if I can go further. So it will squeak easily. And even just doing that little bit, I kind of can feel some muscles here that are like, ooh, that was working a little bit. And it doesn't sound great. How would I use this in a piece of music? If I was playing something and I felt like my tone just wasn't as round as I wanted it to, often I'll play my whatever I'm playing. Then I'll try that passage with this ridiculous exercise, which I know probably won't sound great while I'm doing that. Then I'll go back to normal, trying to keep some of that roundness. And I usually find it feels like it's just coming out effortlessly. So strange exercise, it has great results. So I just toss that out there as something you can all experiment with. And I feel sorry for everyone who gets to hear you play, and my poor family has to hear it too, but it's really helpful. Debbie, can I tag back to you, or do you want me to keep going?
I got it. I think that these tips are so helpful, and I just tried that, and I thought, whoa, that really actually informs my air and my my muscles, because I have to really blow with that much mouthpiece in my mouth. I love that. So something else I wanted to talk about is that I really love to use my low register to make my tone as beautiful as I possibly can. So I am going to share a long tone exercise with all of you that we can play together. It's nice and easy, don't worry. And this is from my book, The Shallow Register, and it is available both on as a hard copy or as a PDF if you want to order it. Hopefully I can put that in the chat, or maybe somebody else can put it in. So what I love to do is to just do a descending scale. And part of my process is I love to breathe out before I breathe in. And I do that so that I get any kind of stale old air that it's just been passively sitting there while I've been relaxing and listening to Michelle. And so I like to get that old air out before I take a full breath in. Now, you might go, but how do I take a big open breath when I need to have my mouth in a specific position for clarinet? Great question. So what I do is I set up my embouchure so that I'm all ready to go. And then I'm going to breathe out around the sides of my mouth. Then I'm going to breathe in and start right here. And then if I run out of air, I'll take a breath. So this is the thing. This is completely open to whatever is going to be best for you. But let's try it again. We're going to go a little faster, and let's breathe out and breathe in and see if we can get all the way to that low G with our biggest forte sound. So let's set our embouchure. We're going to breathe out for 4 and in for 4. Breathe out and 1, 2, 3, 4. Breathe in. We have this lovely rest here, and I usually have a little extra air left in, so I'm going to go ahead and breathe out again. breathe in again, and then I'm going to play to the top. So let's do that now. Breathe out. Breathe in. So I love how this makes me, like, kind of reminds me about how to be relaxed and how to just use up all my air and then play again, use up all my air, play again. And I just love the kind of more yogic vibe of it, where it's a very relaxed way and I'm trying to play with my best tone all the way through. One other thing that I really like to do, as you notice, I have some of the more challenging major scales here. I teach these to my students right away so they get used to doing all these wackadelic fingerings that we aren't going to get into today. But anyway, that's just a great exercise to sort of get yourself warmed up. So do it on easy scales, do it on hard scales, but I think it's a terrific way to warm up. And back to you, Michelle. Warm up your tone, that is.
I love that, Debbie. And I find a lot of people experience trouble with managing their air. Either they feel like they can't play long enough in one breath, or they start to feel breathless. And just many people aren't aware that we can be guilty of breathing too often without kind of blowing out the bad air. And basically when we take a lung full of fresh air, our lungs are extracting oxygen from it. And if we breathe and our lungs are still half full, it's full of half air that's not so great. And then our brain thinks, oh, not enough oxygen, breathe more. And we get into this cycle. So training yourself to exhale fully really will help you manage your air. And that exercise of Debbie's is so great to just practice it in a relaxed, mindful manner. So I love that. I recommend that to everybody. I thought of another exercise, and this sort of goes a little bit into tone, but also to high notes, which is one of our subjects for today, that many people find it tricky to know what to do inside their mouth when they're playing the clarinet. We've talked a lot about the outside of our mouth today. The shape of our mouth, everyone's mouth is shaped differently. So I'm not going to say there's a perfect way to do it, but you need to discover what works for you. And we use we call it the voicing, most people, the shape of our mouth. It's different for different styles of music. So right now I'm going to go for more of a pure classical tone. But we would experiment with these same effects if we're doing klezmer music, folk music, jazz music. It's moving our tongue around inside our mouth will change not only the tone quality and timbre, but the pitch. So I think it's useful, no matter what style you play, to kind of aim for the basic good classic voicing. So that's what I want to show you. What we want to imagine is our tongue is high in our mouth. So when Debbie was doing her whistle exercise, she said, say he, and then wrap your lips in so you sort of get a he, it ends up sounding like a hue kind of sound. Again, might be slightly different for everyone, but having our tongue high in our mouth makes a smaller channel for the air, and then the air moves faster, and faster air gets the reed going more, and we get better tone. So here's an exercise you can use to test if your tongue is staying high. You need a tuner, and there's so many great tuning apps. The one I'm going to use today is the Tonal Energy Tuner, and it's a really fun one, TE tuner, but I love it because it has little happy faces. So here's the exercise. I'm going to play my high G, which is register key, 3 fingers, and I'm slowly going to slur one note at a time up to high C. And it really, for this exercise, it doesn't matter so much if you're perfectly in tune. What you want to notice is what happens as you go higher. And if your tongue is a little bit too low, it's going to go flatter and flatter on each note. So I'm going to demonstrate that. I'm going to have my tongue in a pretty good position, but not fully high. And we're going to see if it looks like I go a bit flatter as I go up. So hopefully you can see my tuner here. I know there's some glare, but... it got so flat, by the time I hit my high C, it thought I was playing a B that was really sharp. And it wasn't awful voicing. It was just kind of mediocre voicing. So what I love is that as I watch it go down, if I were somebody working on voicing, I would try and get the happy face, which is what I'll hopefully demonstrate next, although my room is kind of cold here, so hopefully I can be in tune. And what we do to bring it in tune is sort of instinctively getting our tongue in the right position, so it helps your body get the feel. Let's try it with more of that he that Debbie was talking about. So I'm flat the whole time. It's because it's very cold in my studio right now, but it was more consistent. And so this is a tool that shows me how it works. So as I said, I'm not so worried that you're perfectly in tune on each of these. It's the change. And if I took the time to really warm my clarinet up or turn the heat on in here, I could probably get the happy face the whole time, which would be really fun. But I really recommend you experiment with that. Here's what happens if I just experiment with my tongue. This would be like, my hand is like an x-ray of what my tongue is doing. You can hear what it does to pitch. Now, when you're playing jazz and klezmer, you want to have those effects, and that's also going to help you discover what to do. But that's a great exercise for everyone to work on. All right, Debbie, I'm going to tag team back to you.
Maybe it'd be a good idea to go to high notes since you kind of set us up with voicing. What do you think? All right, so I'm going to talk a little bit about kind of taking it to the next level, what Michelle was doing. So I think the coolest thing about the clarinet is that this is our register key, right? And when we play, for example, a shallow A, we open that register key and it makes, sorry, you guys can't see me. Then it makes an E, and it's lovely. Especially if your air is nice and fast. So sort of, I really love warming up my low register and then using that air and that focus to then just move my thumb, and that should come out. If my air is too slow and I move my thumb onto that register key, and by the way, I don't want you guys to jump up to the register key. I always am touching my register key with my left thumb. So if my air is too slow on my low A, kind of this voicing situation, it's either going to come out a little flat, exactly what Michelle showed, or come out even like the undertone kind of noise. Now, what's really interesting, unique, kind of annoying about the clarinet is we have this little tiny register key. And if you guys open it, you can look under there and that hole is super tiny. The clarinet up here, these we call tone holes, but actually this first tone hole is also a register key. And so that's how we get the altissimo notes to come out. And so I'm going to share something with you just so you have a visual of what I'm going to do. And then I'm going to show you what I'm going to do. So if you want to work on voicing and getting your altissimo notes to come out, this is a great exercise. And so the first note is just A, and then we add the back register key. And then to get the C sharp to come out, we actually just pick up our index finger while we're fingering that low A, the low A being the fundamental or the main fingering pattern that we're going to use. This A is our fundamental. Add a register key, it turns into E. Open the second register key and it turns into C sharp. So I'm going to demo that really quick with too little. Well, I'll do it correctly and then I'll do it with too little mouthpiece and too much, and you guys will see what happens. Okay, so first thing I'm going to do is low A, add my register key to get E, and lift my index finger to get C sharp. You guys can join me. Here we go. 1, 2, half notes, go. And if it came out, great. If it didn't, don't worry, because we're going to fix it. All right, so if it didn't come out, put a little more reed in your mouth. So we're going to do our setting up again, right? We stretch our bottom lip. And instead of putting in less mouthpiece, let's put in a little bit more and do that again. So if you didn't have luck the first time, hopefully it worked. And now I'm going to do too little, just so that you guys can hear what happens if you do too little mouthpiece. So when I'm squeezing that reed closed, it hardly wants to play any of those things. And so it almost doesn't matter if your tongue position is correct or incorrect. If you have too little mouthpiece in, it's not going to work for you. And granted, if you do too much, that can be another challenge. But I think that this type of warm up, if you get a great tone on your low A and you're able to just add your register key and the E floats out, generally your C sharp is going to work beautifully as well. Michelle, do you want to piggyback on that?
Yeah, I love what you're saying. And I think, Debbie, what you just touched on is so common for all of us. One thing that happens unconsciously that we need to be aware of is when we see something that looks hard. So when Debbie put that exercise on screen, you might have looked at the low A and gone, oh, that note's easy, maybe the E okay, but you see altissimo E, and I call it the red alert goes off. Part of your brain goes, oh, that's hard. And when we're experiencing the red alert, we tense up. And unnecessary tension causes all kinds of problem in our clarinet playing. And I think one of the best things you can do is record yourself on video, even though that can, it was unpleasant sometimes to listen to us, and look and listen for unnecessary tension. So what Debbie was just doing when she was sort of pinching the reed shut and she got that thin sound, we often have it. If you squeak when you're trying to play your high notes, that's often our jaw tensing up, and it's unconscious. Our body's reaction to stress is to tense up and prepare. So we always need to be loosening our shoulders, because try this. Take your shoulders and make them as tight as you can. Can you keep your voice open and relaxed? It was really hard for me to do that. It made my voice tight right away. It's going to make our air tight and our clarinet tight. So all those exercises we did earlier about the scream help keep our jaw from being tight. We also tend to back off on our air because we're afraid something bad is going to happen. So subconsciously our air says, oh, I'm going to back off so that people don't hear that awful thing that's about to happen. And we need to overcome that by just blowing through it. I often will have my students, if I notice they're getting tense, do goofy things when they practice. Like, let's say they were doing Debbie's exercise and that high E was really stressing them out. Or the high C sharp, I should say, if we were doing that first one. I'll have them play it like moving in slow motion, like they're on the moon. And as goofy as this is, or underwater, it gets them more relaxed. And I'll say your air has to be strong no matter what. And sometimes they'll be amazed at how easily it just pops out. So we have to recognize where we're in the habit of tensing up and train ourselves to relax. And it happens in many different ways. We also see it when fingers start pounding in those hard bits. And when we're slapping our fingers, it's really going to slow us down. So that's unnecessary tension. We always want to be having our fingers moving like they're moving through taffy. They lift slowly and they come down slowly, and that they're just easy and relaxed. All right. Some of the things Debbie was just talking about high notes reminded me of a couple basic things. So if you're a less experienced player, or maybe you've come back to your clarinet after a long time away, if we're on the reed strength that's not ideal for where we are developmentally with embouchure and air, it can make high notes really challenging. So I just want to quickly mention, if your reed is too soft, what you might experience when you're trying to play high notes is your sound is a bit wild and flat, and it'll wimp out as you go higher. Something like this. That's a really common sound. It means there's not enough support for the note. And of course, air and embouchure are big parts of it. But in that, I mentioned earlier, I have something called the Clarinet Gear Guide, just clarinetgearguide.com. It's free. It's a collection of my YouTube videos. You can find them on YouTube related to gear. But there's one specifically about trying to figure out what reed strength might be ideal for you right now. And if you're not sure of that, that would be a great resource for you. So I'll just leave that for you to follow up on. The other thing that can make a big difference, and from time to time it's worth checking on, is the angle you hold your head at and the angle your clarinet is. Again, everyone's face is different, so your perfect angle will be different from mine. But a really common bad habit is people look down when they play. That restricts our air. It can also really affect our high notes. Let me play just a few high notes with my head up, and then I'm going to move it down and listen to the difference in sound. So having your head up not only lets your air work, it changes this angle. Same thing, you need to experiment with what angle you hold your clarinet at relative to your face that plays best, because it's different for everybody. All right, there is a question here that's come in that I think is related. Oh, favorite exercise for introducing half hole. So why don't I answer that, and Debbie, maybe you could do that as well. Um, First of all, half hole, Debbie talked about our third register key. When we go into the altissimo, our highest register, we lift our top finger. That creates quite a difference in air pressure. So sometimes when we're going from a high note into the altissimo, the clarinet just feels so different. We find we either get a delay in the altissimo or they pop out really unpleasantly. So half holing is where instead of lifting our finger off the hole, we kind of slide it down and only partially uncover it. And personally, I love half holing. I use it most of the time in my altissimo. I know some people use it some of the time. It's worth experimenting. So one of my favorite ways to introduce it is to, it's very similar to what Debbie was just doing actually, is to take a note like our clarion E and then just in slow motion slide that finger off. And usually that altissimo note will pop out more easily. Now, it's a little harder to slide back down, but then they can go up chromatically, lift a finger, slide, and it just sort of takes training, but often we have a lot more control with half hole. Debbie, do you have anything to add to that about half hole?
Yeah, I love everything that you said already. When I teach half hole, I generally teach it after the student has had some success with the altissimo popping out. So I teach it for the pop out at first, and then I go to teaching it. But this exercise right here would be a perfect one to teach half hole, because you've got this establishing your tone on the low note, adding your first register key. And then what's so neat about half hole is then it makes this register key more similarly sized to this one. Remember how I pointed out how tiny that one is? That is the hugest benefit of half hole that makes it go smoothly. So I usually have my students first practice it lifting, just to let it pop out so that they're really confident it's going to work. So for example, I'll do B flat, F, and pop out my D. Now, one little reminder, any note above C sharp, you have to add this pinky on most clarinets. It's called the E flat key, and that helps raise it, because just overtones of the clarinet, I'm not going to get into it, but they aren't in tune all the time. So here we go. I'm going to do B flat, add my register key for F, and then I'm going to lift off my finger. So I want to pop almost when that D comes out, and I'm going to add this pinky. So here we go. You can do it with me if you'd like. 2, ready, go. And as you can hear, it really pops. But that, at least I know, is going to be successful. And then the next step would be exactly what Michelle showed you, is to do the same thing, but instead of lifting this finger, I'm going to slide it down. And what I do is I aim the bottom side of my finger toward this pad. So it kind of gives me a goal, and everybody's finger is different. And so, opening half the hole, for some people, they're going to have to go much further than others, depending on how big your finger is. The key, though, is that you want to make sure as you're half holing or aiming towards that pad, you make sure that that pinky goes on that D key. So let's do the same exercise, but as a half hole this time. Starting on B flat. 1, 2, ready, go. And you can see that it comes out much less popped and much more beautiful. I love teaching half hole going up. Michelle, is that generally how you teach it too? So I will make sure that this exercise, I'm just going to show it to you guys right now, is shared with you after the class. I have all the fingerings underneath each note, and the little caret means to make sure you put down your E flat key. The only note that doesn't have it is that C sharp.
That's great. Yeah, thank you, Debbie. I wanted to talk about a couple other things more related to the altissimo. So now we're getting into the highest register. I think the biggest problem people have is panicking and biting and squeezing and pinching those notes out. So we always want to be mindful of that. But I will say, when we get into what I call the more extreme altissimo, and I don't know that there's a clear break point, but I'm going to say it starts around high G and up, maybe F or G, depending on how you play. We actually do change our embouchure a little bit. And sometimes that can feel tricky to get used to. So I have an exercise that helps you get the feeling of it. And I think one of the things that changes in the extreme altissimo is what our jaw does with in relationship to the reed. So again, I'm going to add that disclaimer. We never want to pinch the tip of the reed shut because then we're limiting vibration. But what I like to imagine in the altissimo is down where the reed is thicker, lower down, we want to push down at an angle downward into the heart of the reed, and that will help us go higher. And sometimes we just have to get our face accustomed to that, and a really good exercise, and I've seen lots of variations. In a way, it doesn't matter what note you start on. I like to do it starting on my low C. What I do is play a low C, and then by thinking of that movement, my jaw moving down into the heart of the reed, see how many higher notes I can hit. It's kind of giving you permission to squeak. But eventually you want to do it in a controlled way so that you're sort of cycling through the overtones of C. So I'm not changing my fingers, but I'm thinking of pushing down. So you can hear 5 notes there. And, you know, if we're warmed up, we can kind of cycle through them. And that starts to give us the feel of how to do it without pinching off the sound. Because if I just bite, it may not be there. So what I'd like to try is to just try that, experiment with it. And if I were working on a high E and it was giving me trouble, that's kind of the third sound there, although it's out of tune. If I can get it working this way when I switch to normal fingering, it's a piece of cake. So it's another tool to kind of help us get that going. Now, there's lots of other high note exercises we can show you, but we're going to talk about articulation. So I want to turn it over to Debbie for that because she is a whiz at articulation stuff.
Thanks, Michelle. So I am very passionate about articulation. And one of the very first things that I talk with all of my students about is how to articulate on the clarinet, because it's really strange. You know, we can speak and talk and all this stuff, but then when we go to try to add it to the clarinet with the reed and everything in your mouth, it's really challenging. So I invite you to take your mouthpiece and barrel and to just have it off. And I teach my basic sounds for articulation as T and tu, but not in a voiced way. So I've been learning a lot about this with my son, who's in speech therapy, and we're going to do an unvoiced T or tu, which is the whisper. If you whisper that, you're going to find that the tip of your tongue hits that ridge right at the front of your mouth, kind of right where the teeth go. And I want to just make a distinction here. When we're talking about tongue position, when we're talking about tone earlier, it's more the sides and back of the tongue. When we talk articulation, it's more the front of the tongue. And I think that that's a point that gets really confusing sometimes. So for voicing and for focus and air, sides and back of the tongue, where Michelle made this shape, that's exactly right. But when we're tonguing, we're going to be using the tip of the tongue right here. So for me, tu, and I kind of have it like the French tu, it's that whistle shape, right, that we made earlier. And then I'm just whispering. Inside our mouth, we're hitting that roof of our mouth. But now we need to replace the roof of the mouth with the mouthpiece and the reed. So that's another reason why I like to not bring my mouthpiece in kind of at a 45-degree angle, but maybe more at a 40-degree angle. So again, right, we make our lip, we put the mouthpiece behind our teeth, and then instead of whispering on the roof of our mouth, we're going to now whisper at the tip of the reed. And T works for some people, two works for others. And I think two, for me, makes that roundness of my lips really helpful. And so a really nice way to start to teach articulation even to beginners is to have them first get a sound on the mouthpiece only. It's going to be horrifying. Warn your family. And we want that to be an F sharp on the piano, a G sharp on the clarinet. So if it's flatter than that, you might need to speed up your air. If it's sharper than that, you might need to relax your embouchure. But what we can do is start the sound, and then we're just going to bounce really gently off of that reed. So let's try that together. First create the sound, and then we're going to whisper T or two. It's up to you. And it kind of takes a little while to get that right sort of bounce. But then you can switch to exercises. Obviously, you'd want to change to a real note, quote unquote. So we would put it back together again. And so now okay, there we go. I like zoomed in and then, okay. So here is talking about that. So a lot of people are taught ta and da, and it's really not ideal. If you guys would take your hand and put it under your chin, and we're going to whisper T, 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 two, 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 and then ta, ta, ta. Ready? Go. T, 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 two, 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 ta, ta, ta. And you can feel that jaw movement. That is one of the biggest challenges with using ta as a syllable, because your jaw is moving up and down. And then what's happening to your embouchure? Well, you're going to get those wah, wah, wah sounds. So experiment. T's and D's are what I use for my clear is my T or two, and legato is D or do. And I'll stop there and see if Michelle has anything. If you want to jump in or if you want me to keep going. Oops, we can't hear you, buddy. Michelle, you're muted, buddy. Or something. I can't hear you, but maybe everybody else can? I don't know. Can you hear her, Jessica?
No, I can't hear her.
Yeah, me neither. Something wacky happened.
Technology, am I right?
Woot. I'll keep talking, and Michelle will work on her audio. Okay, so moving on. So that was my tips for terrific tonguing, but now I have this other thing I want to share. So let's go ahead and do some articulation on notes. So the first time we're going to go through, we're going to use T or two. Second time, we're going to go D or do. We are not going to do this note for now. Normally, I have students do this note because it establishes their tone and gets them going. Oh, let's do it. Why not? Because I do want you guys to have success with this. So here we go. And if you don't want to work on low C, you can just add your register key and play G. All good. All right, so here we go. We're going to play this note for 2 counts, and then we're going to go through this whole thing. We're going to stop at the end, take a breath, and do another round with the do. So here we go. T or two. 1, 2, ready, go. So let's go ahead and now do it. Do. I did T that time. I'm going to do on the way back through. So here we go. Same thing. You'll play the very first note and then do all the way across. And the key to this really working is your air goes all the way through your clarinet, and you kind of are aiming it at the floor while you do this, and your tongue is just gently bouncing. One thing I heard a long time ago from Howard Klug is if your air is at a 10 out of 10, your tongue needs to be at a 1 out of 10. So your tongue is going to be very gentle while your air is super strong. So let's go ahead and try that. And then we want to leave some time for questions too. So here we go. 1, 2, ready, go. Michelle, are you back?
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Okay, great. Sorry I had to just disconnect my mic, so it won't be my good mic, but hopefully you'll hear me. Thank you so much, Debbie. Yeah, I love all these exercises about getting the right shape. You know, a lot of people wonder what part of my tongue do I use, but when you're whispering the syllables into the clarinet as you did, you naturally use the right part of the tongue for your body and your shape. So I just want to add, when I think about the common challenges people have with articulation, there's two that really stand out. One, and this will show up more likely on higher notes than lower just because they're more reactive. People will say, my tone's pretty good when I'm slurring, but when I try tonguing, the notes delay or they don't sound good and they don't want to come out. So common. And what that's related to is, again, conditioning of our body. We are used to, when our tongue moves, we're used to our air moving too, because that's how we speak. Otherwise, we would talk incredibly monotone all the time. So when we play clarinet, there's a little bit of a tendency for our air to accent the front of the note and then to fade. So if I was just listening to my air when I'm tonguing, it's like my body wants to go to do that kind of effect. And when we stop our air, then we don't have enough air support to start the next high note. So on an extreme level, you'll kind of get that. Now, most of us don't play it that extremely. It usually shows up more subtly, something like this. You can still hear the shape of the notes as I'm accenting. So one of the things we really want to train is our air to move nonstop. And there are a couple tools I use for that. One is to take the clarinet out of our mouth and just blow, as Debbie was doing, and whisper, maybe thinking our T or a 2-syllable, and listening to our breath and making sure it's even. In fact, here's what we want to imagine. I'm a human air hose, and if I could do inside out tonguing, take my tongue out, my tongue gets in the way of the air, but it doesn't change how I'm blowing in any way. So I like doing this first, and then whispering T. When I start whispering, I notice right away my body kind of wants to change it. So first I want to get it going. Then I might try either the barrel and mouthpiece, as Debbie was demonstrating earlier, or just an open G. And my focus is, can I program my brain and body to blow steadily without being influenced at all by what my tongue is doing? And that's tricky. And that will make tonguing high notes much, much easier. And that's something a lot of people struggle with. So generally, if you can slur it, then you know you've got the air and embouchure for it. If you can't tongue it, you're interfering with your air unconsciously, and fix that, and tonguing will be easy. The other really common thing that happens, you know, Debbie mentioned our jaw moves, so that's something to watch for, and usually whispering and thinking T rather than ta will help that. But sometimes we get into hammer tonguing. Just in the same way, when we tense up, our fingers can smash, our tongue can smash. And most of the time, we actually only need the lightest possible touch. And I love how Debbie said we're just thinking of the front of our tongue moving as little as possible. So if you're a hammer tonguer, and I'm a reformed hammer tonguer, I still sometimes hammer, I maybe can't even call myself reformed. Here's an exercise that really helped me, and it's hard. What I do, imagine my finger is my tongue. You try and play a note while you're playing with your tongue actually touching the reed. So it vibrates and tickles, and then you simply like close the reed, open it, close it, open it. So it kind of sounds like we're articulating, but we never allow our tongue to actually leave the reed. And when we close it, we want to do it as lightly as possible. So we're just kind of doing micro movements with our tongue. Sort of, this is hard to do. So I'll start by playing a note and then slow motion lowering my tongue till I'm touching it, but the note's still playing. It really tickles. So I'm kind of alternating between no sound and just a little bit of sound coming out. If I have the patience to do that about 10 times, then I just extend my range of motion a fraction of an inch further. So my tongue is coming off and then coming back on in slow motion. And this is training our tongue to just move a little bit lighter. And it's a really helpful exercise. So if you're
And
a hammer tonguer,
you keep your air blowing that whole time, even though your tongue is kind of closing it off and kind of.
great point. Yeah, I'm blowing nonstop the whole time. Yeah.
So, looks like we have some time for questions, like 3 minutes, 5 minutes.
Let's do it. Sheila has one there.
Yeah, go for it.
So Sheila says, any tips for strengthening the mouth and jaw if you get tired before it's time to end the rehearsal? That's a great question. I'll give a quick answer, and then Debbie, you too. So if your jaw is sore, sometimes that's a sign that we've been tensing too much. So all the stuff we talked about earlier, trying to be more open and relaxed might help. But our face muscles moving in the direction we do for clarinet are not used to doing it. They're weak and they need to build up endurance. So the best way to build endurance is short, frequent practice sessions. So rather than playing an hour a day, go 3 different times a day, 15 minutes. That's what helps build endurance faster. Debbie, do you have anything to add?
I think also letting yourself take breaks when it is getting tired. But if you do have pain back here, that's definitely something in your TMJ joint. Like you want to be careful with that, because it definitely means that you're probably muscling too much from the bottom to the top, like biting upward, because this jaw, the top one doesn't move. The only one that moves is the bottom one. And so if we're having pain and pressure, that's definitely coming from that direction. But I agree with Michelle. And in some ways, I think when we are not in COVID times and we can go to rehearsals, that's the best time to strengthen, because you stop and go so often. That doesn't necessarily help you, but that's what I think. So starting with the most thoughtful embouchure shape or airspeed or whatever you're working on that you can. What other questions do we have?
I see a question from Michael. Any tips for teaching intonation in altissimo? Crucial things to check. High E seems to be very tricky for young students. Some of what we said, hopefully, Michael, already applies to what you were just talking about. I think too that exercise of doing voicing with the tuner also applies when we go higher. So sometimes pitch is a tongue being too low issue. Debbie, would you add anything to that?
The other thing I was thinking is, if they're good at high C, for example, another way to teach voicing is to have them, let's say, play G to C with the register key down. Letting go of the register key and see if the note stays up. If their air is too slow or they don't have enough reed in their mouth, it's going to drop to a grunt. Or it's going to drop down the octave. So that can work on airspeed, which could be helpful, because a lot of times I find that either the reed is too soft or the air is too slow. And those two things contribute so much to whether altissimo is in tune or not. And then the other thing Michelle did with the exercises, and I call it jumping down the reed, fingering only low A or C or whatever. We have these different harmonics that we can get out, and what she was saying about getting the harmonic and then going to the fingering they want, for example, is really helpful. What else do we have?
I would add one more thing to that. Oh, and then I know we're just about out of time.
Yep.
Here's another exercise for more advanced students to help with the air speed. So we talked about voicing. Air speed for high notes is really important. It's one I like to do where we take tonguing out of the equation. It's just air. And I'll have my students starting on a clarion C sharp and then going to the altissimo C sharp, our lowest one, just with their air sort of huffing, ha, ha, between the two, trying to get them to match. And it teaches them the changes we need to make in our air. And then I'll have them do the low one loud, the high one soft. And work their way up. And when you can do that exercise smoothly, it teaches you all kinds of things about how to use your air. That's the 10-second version of a 5-minute exercise.
Oh my goodness. Thank you both so much. This has been such a great session. And I saw one comment on Facebook that said it wouldn't be a virtual event without a mic problem. Excuse me. So we're all set here. We got another session coming right up at 2 o'clock Eastern. So we're going to jump off here and get set up for that. We'll look for those courses from Michelle and Debbie. We'll share those on social media and also on the ICA website. So look for that, and we will see you in just a few more minutes. Bye.
Thank you.
Bye, everybody.
Bye.